Stories of Place. From the bustling streets of Tokyo and the rugged landscapes of the Australian bush to the Mexican-American border and the Dublin suburbs of Ireland, Stories of Place is brought to you by 9 international authors on 3 continents and features the What 3 Words geocode system. Spanning literary genres from thriller to familial love, let your journey into the vast spectrum of the human experience begin.
Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And I am so happy today. I have 4 authors with me. My goodness, this is exciting. And here they are: NIAMH McANALLY, USA, Sandy Foster, UK, Catherine Johnstone, Australia, and Connor McAnally in Ireland. And I am so happy to welcome you to Joy on Paper Live.
Hi,
Hello.
Patsy.
Okay,
Thanks
this
for
is
having us.
exciting. I love the idea of the book, and of course, has been on Joy on Paper, both the radio program and on live twice, because she's come out with 2 books. And so I thought it would be so much fun when she told me about this anthology. And there are 9 writers and 18 stories in this book. I love anthologies. And NIAMH, if you would explain, please, what it means and why there are 3 words and what those 3 words mean.
Certainly. And if I could just go back in a little bit in time, Patsy, to explain how the 9 of us even came together in the first place to put this anthology together. We all met on a Curtis Brown Creative online writing class back in 2020. Everybody was going through the pandemic, they were isolating, and we all took this online class, and we were in these various different countries around the world. And we all individually had our own manuscripts. If you remember, I was working on Flares Up at the time, and we took this course called Edit and Pitch Your Novel. And when the course was over, we kept in touch and we started meeting regularly on Zoom once a month. And as the time progressed, we were encouraging each other. Somebody was getting an agent, if another person had a rejection, then we would try and keep each other's morale up, and we kept going. We would critique each other's work and help each other out. And then we decided we would meet together in person, and we would everybody try and meet together in England. Most people were in England at the time, but like Kathy, who's here with us today, she flew in from Melbourne, Australia. Nina Smith came in from Texas. I came from Florida. Connor came from Ireland. So we actually pulled it off where all 9 of us came together in the UK and we met. And that was in 2023. And we went to the place where we had this kind of country manor, and we spent the weekend like on a writer's retreat. And we were sitting around, we said, let's work on a collaboration of an anthology of our short stories. But how could we put our different genres, very eclectic writing styles together that would make sense? And it was Emil Casson who came up with the idea that of basing it on the theme of What 3 Words. Now, What 3 Words, I hadn't heard of it. It had started out in the UK. And it's based on a geocode app called What 3 Words. And I'll just explain that. There was a guy called Chris Sheldrick, who was a UK concert promoter. And he often struggled to get his bands to the right venues. So for instance, let's say you have Wembley Stadium, for instance. It's a huge venue and the band could end up at the wrong entrance. Sometimes he had a band that would show up even at the wrong wedding. And then he started giving them coordinates, longitude and latitude, and they still didn't get to the right place. They would transpose numbers. So he thought there has to be a better way. He and his college mate, Mohan, got together and they came up with this algorithm where they mapped out the entire planet, including the oceans, including the ice shelves, like Antarctica and the North Pole and everywhere. And they mapped out 3 meter by 3 meter squares and gave each one of them a unique 3-word address. Now, in the United States, that's 10 foot by 10 foot square. And the subtitle of this book, Stories of Place, is Zinc Level Blindfold. And that is the exact square we were all sitting at in England when we came up with this idea. And believe it or not, originally we were going to call the book Zinc Level Blindfold, but it was Kathy Johnson who came up with the idea that we should have an overarching title for the book. So she said, what about Stories of Place? And then we made the Zinc Level Blindfold the subtitle, which I thought at the time was a great idea because we could come out with another edition another time with Stories of Place with a different subtitle. And in the back row of this picture there, you'll see Emile. She's the second from the left. She was the one who came up with the idea for the what three words as a theme. And we think it's really worked. Now, inside the book, you've got 18 stories. We have 2 stories from each of us. And each story is a what 3-word address. So it's 3 words for each story. And you have the option, you could look it up on this what 3-word app to see where it's located. And they're all over the world, these stories. Or you could just read the story and try and glean from the context where it's set. And then look up the app afterwards and see how it works. So we've been sharing this now. We've launched the book in April of 2025. And it's been amazing in some of the launches we've done around the world. We're actually educating people about this particular app, and people are saying, well, this is really easy. When you go to the beach and you say, oh, I'm going to meet my friends on the beach. Beaches are big places, like, oh, we're 100 yards down the beach near the umbrella. Where's that? If you had that 3 square meters, you'd know exactly where that was. So we've been able to, what's wonderful about it is now suddenly literature and technology are meeting. And it's just been a fantastic way to blend the two and explore. So we're very excited about bringing this out to market.
It's such a clever idea. And so I was happy that you came to me with this idea of doing a show with all of you. My viewers are always interested in knowing something about the writers of the books that I introduce. And so I thought, Nia, what you can do is you can introduce each of our other writers.
Certainly. Shall we start with Sandy Foster? Sandy's an actress, a novelist, a playwright, a wonderful writer that I first met on that course back in 2020. Sandy, would you like to tell everybody about your writing career and also about the writing style that you do? And maybe we'll talk about some of the books that you read that has influenced your writing over the years and the kind of things you like to read.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with my writing career. So I'm an actor. That's been my career for the last sort of 15, 20 years now. But I started writing plays, I guess, about sort of 10 years ago. Wanted a bit more autonomy, and I wanted to find out what my voice might be, because I'm so used to stepping inside characters where everything's planned out for me in terms of what they're thinking and feeling and saying. So I really enjoyed that process. I've written a few plays and a one-woman show. But then in I guess I started writing the novel in 19, I think. And I was working at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the time on stage. And then I finished my first draft of the novel. And then lockdown happened. And we all know what that was like. So we were all trapped in our houses with little to do and twiddling our thumbs. And at that point, I thought, I'm going to pull out this first draft of this novel and see if it's got legs, see if it's got anywhere worth going with. Found this course online, which was the Curtis Brown course, and the rest is history, really. Met all of you guys. And yeah, I've always found that the process of rewriting has been a bit of an anomaly for me. I've never quite understood how one pulls apart a piece of work while maintaining the core of it. But we were taught a really useful process at the time, which was quite complicated and quite long, but I really enjoyed that process of being brave and killing your babies, as they say, getting rid of your good ideas so that others can be born. And then throughout the process of that course, finished another draft and then another draft and then another draft, and 9 drafts later I got an agent for my novel, which is called The Weight of All of Us. Yeah, and it's a sort of end of world speculative fiction, quite dark, but also quite funny in places. So yeah, follows one woman's story to begin with, and then we zoom back in time to work out how it is that we've got to this place where she is the last surviving human on planet Earth. So yeah, that is my writing history.
So Sandy, how was it for you then moving from, say, a novel to writing the short story? Did you write the short story for your, I know you have 2 in Stories of Place. Did you write them specifically for Stories of Place, or did you have them already, or the ideas already?
No, I wrote them specifically, and it's short stories is an area that I'd never really explored and didn't really feel it would be my bag. I think I really get a lot out of the long form narrative. With plays, I really enjoy the characters feeling and thinking more than they're saying, but I found great freedom in the kind of lyricism and poetic nature of novel writing. I love that I could basically say everything I wanted to say and then cut it down 9 drafts later. So with the short story, I found it really intimidating and I didn't know where I would start, and it wasn't a natural home for me. But I found this process of being given 3 words and having to come up with a story based on that location and using those words incredibly useful, and actually have since written more short stories using that process. There's something about being given 3 completely unconnected words and just letting your imagination run wild. So yeah, with both those stories, those 3 words were the starting point, and I went from there really.
Excellent. And what about in terms of reading? What book would you say, or books, would have influenced you as a child? Is there anything that kind of even changed your life on a personal level?
Yeah, I've always been a very prolific reader and I've got a very eclectic taste. I love everything from graphic novels to classical to the occasional beach read. Yeah, and I love memoirs. I'd say, yeah, my earliest memories are of sitting in the corner of my parents' house reading noddy books while all the other children were outside playing. I was a real bookworm. Yeah, I feel, funnily enough, despite my novel being speculative fiction, that's not a genre that I tend to read. I Wuthering Heights was a book that definitely changed the way I felt about the world. It has a darkness that I'm really attracted to. And Dracula, those really heavy classics that you can read while it's hammering down with rain outside by an open fire, they're a real pull to me. But I also love memoirs. Abby Morgan's written a brilliant memoir called This Is Not a Pity Memoir, which is about her husband who had a terrible collapse and was in a coma for a long time, and her experiences are very harrowing but hopeful. And a book I always come back to is Charlotte Delbo's Auschwitz and After, which is about her experiences in the concentration camp. And much like the anthology, it's rather than a kind of really clear like through line narrative, it's thoughts and poems and short kind of vignettes and images, and it's written about a very incredibly dark time, the darkest time probably we've ever experienced. But there's a lot of hope in there, and yeah, so I come back to that very often. Yeah.
Good stuff. And so when your novels come out, where can readers follow you? Online? Are you on Instagram, or where will they follow up to find out when your books are coming out?
Yeah, I signed to an agent in March 2023, I think. Philippa Sitters, who's great, Philippa Sitters Associates. So watch her website for updates on when we might get a book deal. I really thought you signed to an agent and that's it, you fly from there, but it's a long process, I'm learning. So I'm writing the second and the third book at the moment. But I'm on Instagram and you can follow me at Sandy Scrawls.
As in scrolls, like in writing? Excellent.
Yeah, Scrawls.
Sandy Scrolls. Brilliant. All right. Thank you. All right. Kathy in Melbourne. There you are. And it's nice and bright sunny. You're a day ahead of us. Have you got the lotto numbers yet? So we can find out.
Not yet.
What have we got? So, Kathy Johnson in Melbourne. So, you've been writing a long time as well, haven't you?
Yeah, basically, I've been reading and writing for many years. Actually, I started writing diaries from the time I was very young. I think from about the age of 9, and so I've still got all the diaries. So, yeah, I was writing from a young age. I loved writing at school. My first degree was a social work degree, but I did writing subjects each year in my first degree, and then I've toyed with writing for many years. I taught screenwriting for 10 years and before I delved into the film world. And then I've returned to writing really in the last maybe 6 years after being in film and also visual art. Yeah.
But then you started writing novels, then that's how we all met again. So you were working on the novel and you were ready to pitch it at that point. Can you tell us a little bit about your novel?
Yes, I was deeply ensconced in my novel, enjoying writing it, and I thought that this Curtis Brown creative course would be a good way just to develop it, edit it, and work out how to pitch it. And Sandy said I thought it would be a quick process, but it turns out to be a long process. But in the meantime, I've actually decided that really my medium is more around memoir and what are known as lyric essays. So I've actually diverted from fiction and now I'm pursuing more a creative non-fiction or lyric essay style. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then let's talk a little bit about your stories that you have that are very evocative stories that you've got in Stories of Place that are, I believe, set in Australia, aren't they?
Yes, both of the stories are set in Australia. The first one is Cure Brings Tribe, and that's set at a town hall in a suburb called Collingwood. So if you looked at what three words address up, you would see that it's at Collingwood Town Hall. So it's actually set in the town hall. It's the setting is a masked ball, a queer masked ball. So it's peopled with many different characters, but there's a protagonist and you find out what she's in a relationship and things aren't going very well in the relationship. And so she's open to meeting someone else. And then you find out at the end if that develops. So that's the first story, Cure Brings Tribe. The second story is Outsiders Snakes Spillage. And that's based on the Greek myth of Persephone. So I made it into a contemporary story. And it's because it's fiction, it's based on two different locations in Victoria, where I live, the state where I live. One is a place called Dalesford, and the other is a place called Wonthaggi, where they have coal mines. So I decided that as a kind of symbol of going into darkness, which is what happens to Persephone into the underworld, that I would use a coal mine as a sort of symbol of the underworld. And so the character, when she's young, has this terrible experience of being taken and a traumatic experience of when she's young, as if she has been taken into the underworld. And in this instance, I imagined her to be taking shelter in a mine. And so that was the connection to the Persephone myth, that where Persephone was taken by Hades into the underworld.
Yeah, lovely tie in that. We won't give the ending away that either.
No.
So how about reading? Who do you prefer to read? And do you binge read or do you dip in and out? How do you like to read?
Yeah, I love reading. I've always loved reading. My mother was a librarian, and so
Ah,
it felt like we were raised with books. So from the time I was born, she was reading stories to me. And then my father was a great storyteller. So every night he would make up stories about three rabbits that lived in our backyard. So I was brought up on a diet of both literature or books that had been already written and stories that were told by my father. So from a young age, they would give us beautiful books. Especially my mother was very up to date with all the contemporary literature for our age at the time. And in fact, I've managed to find one here that's a very early book
oh,
called
lovely.
The Fairy Tale book. Hang on, I've got to do it around the right way.
Yeah, we see it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that my parents signed saying, "To dear Kathy, wishing you a happy Christmas. Love from Mummy and Daddy." So that would have been when I was probably 5 or 6. And I love that book. It's a beautiful hardcover book with lovely illustrations. So I loved being in the world of fairy tales when I was young, but I also read all the contemporary young people's books of the time. And then in more recent years, I read a lot of contemporary literature, and like Sandy, I also love memoirs, and I've always loved memoirs. So I read a lot of that. I'm also influenced by poetry. I read a lot of poetry, and I always read the Booker winner and all
Yes.
the contemporary prize winners. Yeah, I read often. I read, probably I have about 2 books on the go, and then I usually have at least one audio book on the go as well. And then I'm usually reading a non-fiction book about whatever I'm writing about at the time. Yeah, so I'm a big reader.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's nice to have the different medium, like between the reading and also listening to the audiobook as well. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's funny because how much the books influence you. One of the books that influenced me particularly, I say, what is it? And it literally used to go in my backpack, was, believe it or not, an anthology called Solo on Her Own Adventure, and it was edited by Susan Fox Rogers. And it was an anthology of short stories by true stories of women who adventured in the great outdoors. And believe it or not, I didn't know at the time, but that literally drove my life and my travels and why I ended up doing so much solo traveling. But isn't it funny how books influence us so deeply at that kind of level?
Th-
Yeah, that's
They
fantastic. And
do.
I and,
They do. I was
and
just
I
going to say
see.
that there was one book. Oh, sorry. I know I've got a bit of a delay, but I was just going to say that there was one book that I read by an Australian woman who travelled with camels across the whole desert in Australia. The book's called Tracks. Her name's Robin Davidson. And when I was living with the Inuit people in Greenland, I read that book. And so I was very inspired by her adventures as well. So it's a bit like that. You're talking about a great solo adventurer who inspired me both to have adventures and to read and write. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned that you do a lot of reading on poetry, and I can see that in your writing because you have a very musical lyricism to your writing. It's so beautiful to read, and you can feel the flow to your writing as well. I love your
Thank
stories
you.
in the book, so I can't wait for everybody else to read them. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad you got up so early there in Melbourne. All right, from
Yes.
Melbourne, let's go to Ireland. Is Connor still there?
I am indeed.
There you go. Hi, Connor. How's it going?
Hi. Very good, thank you.
Good.
All good.
Let's talk about your writing journey. You've been writing since dot, right?
Yeah, originally started writing poetry when I don't think I'd even turned 10 by then, and had first poems published when I was 15, 16 in the newspapers. And then when I left high school, my parents wanted to know what I wanted to do. And I was like, I want to write. They're like, you're never going to make any money doing that. So you get two choices. You can either go into journalism or advertising. I didn't want to write advertising. So I went into journalism, became a journalist that, in newspapers, magazines, radio, television, led to a life in television of producing, directing, writing scripts, all that kind of stuff. And I've gone through doing shows in Ireland, in the UK, and in Australia, and more recently, a lot of them in the USA, but always wanted to get back to doing some creative writing. And so I'm back doing that now and having a thoroughly good time, and delighted to have met my tribe in our Zoom writer group.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think you have a book coming out this year. Is that not true?
Yeah, the novel that I actually was working on and that was working on the editing pitch is coming out in November with Stony Creek Publishing in Texas. It's called Bullets in the Water. It's a thriller. That's my genre. I love writing and reading thrillers. And my earliest books were Famous Five and Secret Seven, but more Secret Seven than Famous Five. And I've consumed vast amounts of thrillers over the years. In fact, I used to produce a show called The Right Stuff, which was about contemporary popular fiction. And we interviewed Jack Higgins, who was a prolific writer of thrillers, in his home in Jersey in the Channel Islands. And we had a meeting with him on a pre-interview the night before we did the actual shoot. And when he'd agreed to all the questions and everything, I hefted up a suitcase full of all his books that I had collected over the years and asked him to sign them. And he was a little bit flattered, but a little bit upset about it as well. I think he got writer's cramp from it. I'm a big Lee Child fan. I particularly love at the moment, I love Don Winslow, who's not all that well known, but I absolutely love his work. I think it has a very exciting phraseology, and his turns of phrase are fantastic. But I read loads and loads of thrillers, and that's what I like to write.
What was it like for you, though, if you were trained initially as a journalist, a journalistic style of writing, to make that switch then to go creative as opposed to top-down writing? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I was probably fudging it a little bit because the protagonist in Bullets in the Water is a journalist, an investigative journalist, like I was myself back in the day. And so I was able to take it a bit from that perspective. But I loved being able to go beyond, go past where the facts are, if you like. And in fact, that particular book was based on an actual murder that happened a mile and a half from where I was living in Texas. And it was this random killing of a person who was delivering newspapers at 5 o'clock in the morning and who was shot dead by two people. The crime has never been solved. Nobody's quite sure what happened. And that sort of set me thinking. So I think a lot of what I'm writing is based fairly loosely at times, but based in fact of stuff that has actually happened. And the same is true in a sense of both of the stories in Stories of Place. One of them, the Checklist Combative Frontman, the idea for that one came as we'd left Petrie House where we'd had our meeting. I was on the way home and I was sitting in the airport, and this line just walked itself into my head and it just said, I stand in shattered silence. And I was like, I have no idea where that's going. But I based it around an explosion. And I, as a reporter in Belfast over the years, had gone through explosions and understood what they meant. And I covered lots of bombings in both in Dublin and in Belfast. So there's a level of familiarity for that. And the other story I've got is Inflow Evade Questions is actually a follow-up on a character that was in the novel and who ends up getting incarcerated. So it was an exploration of what possibly could happen to this guy. I found him, although he's a bad character, he's a nasty guy, but I found him fascinating and in a bizarre way, a little bit likable. I had a little bit of an affinity for him, and it sounds very writerly and a bit naff, but I always wondered what happened to him. So I found out by writing it.
That's very interesting because you see sometimes writers have short stories and they have a character in a short story, and then people embrace it and then they turn that into the novel. So it's interesting to have a side character in a novel, then get their own short story out of it.
Yeah, it was just, I just found him a fascinating character. I was like, I wonder what happened to him after the novel. That's what created that. But it's been a fantastic process. And the anthology has been so much fun to work on. And it was interesting because we do all have such eclectic and different sort of styles of writing. And to have found a way of dovetailing all of that together has been fantastic. And based on the launch, I did my launch here live on radio, and the response to it has been phenomenal. But people are fascinated by the whole concept of the what three words and like how that connects literature and the actual real world. I keep getting asked about it all the time.
Yeah, it's been fantastic, actually. And coming back to you, thank you, Connor. And coming back to you, Patsy, it's one of the things that we found during launch day was that, like I said, we started first in Melbourne with Kathy. She had her launch first, and then it was Nina in Perth, then Connor's one live on the radio in Ireland, and then London, and then Sandy in Barbados, and then mine was the last one in Florida. And they were feeding me photographs of all their different launches. So by the time it came to me in London, or sorry, in Florida, I literally had those photographs coming in. So we had all 6 launches. And the same thing as everybody else was feeling, the extraordinary thing. Sometimes you go to a book launch and it's very interesting and you meet the author and whatever the story is, it's either somebody you've met before or it's a new author. But to have 9 authors in a launch, and also this unusual thing that not everybody has heard about, and it's a real practical application that people can use in their real lives. We have found the next day after my launch, I had people saying to me, I am sitting with basically their desk, they say, I'm coming to you live from Mug Lamp Potato, which was amazing. They were just starting to use it. And I think that's what's been fantastic for all of us, that we really are giving some value as well as some like nice, easy reading as well.
It's really wonderful. I did the same thing. I checked out like the 3 words for where I was born, the 3 words where my brother's living, the 3 words where our sauna is. Oh, very old sauna in northern Michigan. I had to check out that one. So it's so clever. And using it as a writing prompt, that is really clever. So I think more people are going to do that. It's definitely on the books.
Yeah,
So,
it's been fantastic for that.
and I'm so happy,
funny.
Connor, that you haven't lost your accent, unlike Nia.
Shall we still have a bit of the brogue, don't you know?
Oh, I love it. I
You
love
wouldn't
it.
want to be losing it altogether.
Yeah, don't lose it. It's lovely. That was fun to talk to everybody, and I get to talk a little bit more to you because, of course, you have been on Joy on Paper Live for 2 of your books, Flares Up and Following Sunshine. And I wanted you to just talk a little bit about your experience in writing your stories in this book. And then I think I have a very special look here for you. Look at this. What is this? You look so elegant here.
Oh yeah, sometimes I clean up pretty nicely. This was one of the awards. We've actually been very blessed recently with the books because this one was the International Impact Book Award for Following Sunshine, and we also picked up the American Writing Award for Following Sunshine. And just recently we got the Independent Press Award for Flares Up. So those 2 books have been doing really well. Flares Up was the story about the 2 men who rowed across the Atlantic in a 20-foot wooden rowboat. That was one of the first ones you and I talked about. Gary and I were living on the sailboat down in the Caribbean when we saw them come ashore. And we ended up taking that iconic photograph of them as they held their flares up. They found out I was a writer, and I said I would write their story. It was about why they did it, how it affected their families, and how the experience changed them as human beings. It is really inspiring, and you couldn't make up some of the stuff that happened to them either before, during, or after the rowing. And then what turned out to be the prequel was Following Sunshine, which is the subtitle of that is A Voyage Around the Mind, Around the World, Around the Heart. And it's about my life growing up in Ireland, a couple of obstacles to overcome, and then a time in my life where I actually ended up with no job, no shelter over my head, and didn't have any kind of transport. So I took off for a year and I traveled around the world as a volunteer and I was working 5 hours a day, 5 days a week in exchange for food and lodging. And I took on one final project, which was to volunteer crew for a solo sailor for 1 month from Florida to the Bahamas. And instead of getting off the boat after a month with Captain Gary, who was the solo sailor, I ended up on the boat for 6 whole years. And after 4 years, we got engaged. And here we are 9 years later, married. And now, guess what we do now? We actually are guest speakers on the cruise ships. So we're back on the water.
It's just wonderful to see all of you. You've done a great job with the book. It's just fantastic. I'm very grateful that you joined me today on Joy on Paper Live. And I'm sure that when you have your individual books, you have to come back and be guests. Okay? You make sure you let me know your release date, and then I'll get you on my calendar.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Patsy.
Very
Well,
much.
it's been a joy
Thanks,
to see all of
Patsy.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Say
Thank
bye to all
you.
of my viewers, okay? And that's
All
it.
right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
It was great to talk to my guests about Stories of Place. I think it's a fascinating book and a great idea. Now you have to look up your 3 words. So what are your 3 words? Just go to what3words.com and discover them. And maybe they will inspire you to write a short story. Think of those 3 words and come out with a good idea. And one day you'll be a guest on Joy on Paper Live. Please click that button, subscribe, comment, and share so that I can bring you more interviews with fascinating authors. Bye-bye now. Bye.
And here we can meet all the authors. Top left is myself, NIAMH McANALLY. Beneath is Emil Casson, then Ben Tufnell and Connor McAnally. And on the right of your screen is Sandy Foster, Lily Duvall, Nina Smith, Kathy Johnston, and Billy Green. Stories of Place. 9 authors, 3 continents, 6 live events to launch on April 10th, 2025 in Melbourne, Australia, Ireland, Perth, London, and Barbados, and wrapping up in Punta Gorda, Florida. Started with Kathy Johnson in Melbourne, Australia at the library, followed by Conor McANally live on Clare FM radio in Ireland. And then we had in Perth, Australia, Nina Smith rocked the house to a packed house in the library with the children all wearing t-shirts with stories of place on them. Then we had the 4 authors, Lily DeVale, Billy Green, Emil Casson, Ben Tufnell. They're all interviewed downtown in a venue in London. And then we had Sandy Foster had the envious job of launching in Barbados. And finally, wrapping up the day, we had myself and Gary Krieger with a multimedia presentation in Florida. So 6 events in one day, quite the launch we had. Here's the 9 of us on one of our Zoom calls. We've been meeting monthly every month for the last 5 years. And this was the culmination of our work together. In May, we have the audiobook coming out by the wonderful voice actor Simon Allison. And guess what? One of our writers is an actor who plays Sleepy in Snow White. It's none other than Sandy Foster.
I declare this book launched.